Called Witheridge, and I'm a painter and a teacher, and I feel that I paint to educate rather than being a painter to sell. I'm not a commission artist. I much prefer the dialogue of painting. So I couldn't paint without dialogue. I've been painting for 20 years, and I studied history of art first of all at university, and I really love the history of painting as well. So it's my relationship with art is as much about the looking at other people's work and about the history of painting. I really feel very linked to that. I studied in Florence, and where I met my husband, and who's from Chicago, and then we came back to London and we opened our own art school, which has been running for 15 years. And I would say I'd still go on lots of art courses, and I love going on art courses as well, both to learn, and I think as a teacher going on an art course, you learn so much more because you learn about your painting, about their approach to teaching. So I love that side of it. As a painter, I love, like when I speak to my husband, he would definitely give up people for paint and sculpture. I definitely love people. So I always love the models, the artists, the students, the whole environment as well. And one of my great things about teaching painting is I don't think teaching painting should be about teaching it just for artists. I think you can teach people to paint so that they can also enjoy the visual world, art history, and everything else around them. And I think when you teach people for that reason, you often find that people who didn't think that people don't have the courage to be an artist, but they have the courage to learn, to study, and then they might end up finding they are an artist, you know, without having had the pressure. So that's the way I like to teach and think about painting as well. I come from, my mother's Swiss French. My father was English, but I grew up all over the world. I only moved to England when I was 18, entered the university, and then I went to live in Italy, and then I moved back again when I was 30. So I'm a little bit, I'm definitely English, but I'm also part of the world.
What moved you to get into the art world? I mean, what moved you to choose to study art history and then to come to Florence and study painting and figurative painting, most of all?
I always loved painting. I think my mother is part of a family of lots of painters. So there were lots and lots of painters in my Swiss family. And my father always loved painting. So I suppose I was very fortunate that I grew up surrounded by not people painting, but surrounded by the fact that being an artist is a very acceptable choice to make. Though when I was at university in my last year, before graduating, I had to go and see the career service, and they said, "What do you want to be when you graduate?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know." And they said, "Well, what do you always wanted to be?" And I said, "I wanted to be an artist." And they said, "Well, I see you've got a great sense of humor, but let's take it seriously now." So to them, it wasn't an option doing painting. So I first of all worked in the art world a little bit, and then before I slowly took the courage to move to Italy and study art properly. I did look round art schools in England, but I found it very disheartening, and I didn't really want to be, I didn't want to be a conceptual artist. I wanted to, or an ideas artist. And I'd say my painting is very, it's very non-narrative. It doesn't have a political message. It doesn't have a narrative about it. It's literally, I think painting is hard enough just working out how to handle paint and color mixing. And I think it's much more just about the joy of oil paint. In loving history of art, I love the technique of painting as well, and I'm not at all slapdash. And because I love the study of painting, that really excites me, how paints are made, what surfaces to paint on. So I would say in my painting approach, I'm always experimenting with new surfaces, new colors. So I'm not a formulaic painter. I don't have my set way and I know it produces a good result. I'd say I definitely have a way of trying and testing new materials, which sometimes end in disaster, and sometimes and more often than not they don't end in disaster. But I'd say I have because I'm teaching, I never paint for my convenience. I always paint in order to give a lesson. So I often teach, with just black and white to show what you can do with that, or just with a limited palette. And I work a lot with a limited palette. When I'm out landscape painting, I often try and keep it limited and then slowly add colour to show them, how adding a little bit of colour can really change the way you paint. So it's not, definitely not formulaic. I do definitely prefer working on linen, but if I have cotton, I think I wouldn't say to people when you first start painting, you've got to paint on linen. I also think it's really important that you paint with cheap materials when you're in the learning process, and then you slowly upgrade your paints. My husband Scott is very good with his materials and making paints and making the canvases. So I've been spoiled and I haven't had to make many of my own. He's made most of them for me.
Where does your inspiration come from? You said you love people, so I guess it comes from people. But how is it created?
I definitely love nature. I love nature more. Like I love painting figures, and I love painting. I basically love whatever's in front of me at that moment. So when I'm painting the nude, I'm like, oh my goodness, I could do this for the rest of my life. And when I'm in a field, I'm like, oh, I could do this for the rest of my life. And I always find it extraordinary when people say to me, but we've painted that model before, because I could paint the same person or even the same cast. When people say I'm bored of casting, I'm like, oh, but how can you be bored? Because I think if you think it's about one subject matter, then you're painting the subject matter. Whilst really as a painter, you should be painting the light and the effect of light and the pattern of shapes and the pattern. And even if you're not painting color and the effects of color, you can be painting the effects of value patterns and edges. So for me, the subject matter is on one level, it's an irrelevance, apart from, I love cows and I love the landscape, but when you're at the moment you're painting, you're not, so you think you're drawn to it because of the subject matter. At the moment you put your brush into the paint, you're thinking much more about the play of light and the play of colors, and you're thinking really very abstractly. So I always say the irony is the greatest abstract painters are actually figurative painters. A Titian up close is a complete abstract painting, or Rembrandt. They're not at all figurative artists if you go up close. And I think often people think that, some people say that Titian was losing his eyesight and his paintings because they got so broad, but I think he just got much more economical with his brushstrokes, and he could say the painting with a lot less brushstrokes. So that's the kind of thing that excites me.
Tell us a little bit about the school and kind of the philosophy of the school, of the spirit of the school.
Our school is called London Fine Art Studios, and it has usually, a couple of months ago, it had 200 people coming through its doors every week. Some people are studying full-time, some people are studying just 3 hours a week. And I really wanted to start a school which was available to anybody who takes art seriously. So you don't want it to be flip, and it's not about expressing yourself. It's about learning how to paint, but it wasn't not because the end result is being a great artist. So I think the benefits for the young students who are doing it, really seriously, it really benefits them to have older people with their different form of wisdom, working alongside them. And just because you've only got 3 hours in your life because you're juggling a family or you're juggling a job, it doesn't make your journey into art less worthwhile or less valid. And I think that's really important for the young artists to see all the different reasons. And I think they learn, I think, in the atelier tradition where you study alongside your peers and with a teacher always painting with you in the room, you learn as much about painting, but also about humanity and life and, how to get along. And I love the fact that our student body are often quite an eccentric bunch, but they all muddle together. And in the normal world, their paths wouldn't cross. And yet, because of art, they have these amazing relationships, which I think is really, really beautiful. As an artist, you feel very indulgent in your life, that you do something which you love. But I often tell my students that they've got to really be true to themselves and not try and think, what sells. But if they paint what they love and what they believe in, and they work really hard, it's not about being flip about it. But if you're really sincere, then there is a world out there for you which is accepting for you. But I'd feel you do feel a bit indulgent that you have such a wonderful existence, but it's also tough, as an artist, you are, it's not an easy, safe job. It's, you know, it's always ups and downs, both emotionally with people's responses to your work and also, you know, financially. But I think as painters, we are a very resilient and resourceful bunch of people. So I think we can definitely weather this storm and do well from it. In terms of the social impact, I mean, I don't feel, on one level, I don't feel that, you know, I feel that the social impact that we do is an indulgent one for ourselves. But I think for me, it's really important more that you make people appreciate the beauty in the everyday. So that's really lovely. And I think people do learn it. And painting is such a kind of a natural instinct in every human being. So getting back in touch with that is really lovely. But I wouldn't say that we have a great standard in the world. I don't think artists are ever that appreciated, and I don't think it will be that change. But I think in our little worlds, it can have impact. You can only be what you are going to be naturally. So, I mean, there are artists who are very commercial and they make a lot of money, and that's their game plan. And it would probably be a quicker, faster ride to just get a job working in a bank. But if your aim is about painting and about art, then your end game shouldn't be the finances. You should trust that the money will happen. I remember when I wanted to go and study art in Italy, my father said, never let money be a problem. Like, always make your decision not about money. Make your decision for the right reason. And I thought it was his way of saying that he'd pay for my school fees, which he never did. He was, and actually what was amazing is I always found a way, you know, I found translation jobs, I found teaching jobs, I did a lot of writing for different magazines. And so if you want to be a painter, you can, but you've got to be willing to juggle lots of different jobs until it happens for you.
Being a teacher and having a school, what is for you like the journey a new student has to go through in a technical way?
So I think first of all, they've got to learn about patience, and they've got to because that's quite hard, you know, that you can't have it straight away. And I think lots of people, they look at me and they're like, oh, but you make it look so easy. And I'm like, but you know, it's been 20 years to make it look easy. It's a long journey. So you've got to have masses of patience. And you've also got to really trust your teachers. So when I do, you know, even though I've been painting for this long, when I go and do an art course with somebody else, I don't go in there and work with my techniques. I completely trust what they're telling me and try and learn it. Perhaps you'll only get 10% of it. You might say, yeah, that's actually really works for me in my practice. And the rest of it you can leave behind. But when you're in that situation, you've got to trust your teachers, not because it means that you want to be like them. You want to you know, absorb what you can from them. So that's really important. You know, when you're looking at Titian, you don't want to be Titian, but you want to learn everything you can from his paintbrush strokes. So it's not about being the artist. So I think it's really important to trust your teachers, trust the methodology, trust the systems, be humble in, you know, what people give you. But I'd also say I definitely let lots of opportunities pass me by because I didn't think I was good enough to put my artwork out there, and I didn't apply for scholarships and grants because I felt as if I had enough already. But I think you've got to put yourself out there at the start, because if you're really a true artist, you should always want to be growing and learning. So at what point will you ever be good enough? So be braver at the beginning about, you know, if somebody says, oh, I really like your work, say, well, you know, you can have it, you can buy it. Yeah. And people love, and also the other thing is people, when you sell artwork, you feel on one level you feel greedy, but it gives the person who's buying it, they're not buying it you know, they're not buying it out of charity. They also want to support you, and they're also excited for you. So you've got to trust the people who want to buy as well. When we started our art school, somebody said to us, but aren't you training your competition? And which I don't believe at all. I think the more you train other artists and the more you include other artists, you kind of elevate the dialogue of art, and you make the world kind of in touch with art. So the more painters out there, the better it is, and the more accessible it is. Because I think lots of people think, oh, I can't possibly have an oil painting on my wall, you know, they're so expensive, when actually their handbag probably costs more than your painting. And it's been handmade. So and I think TIAC has that really lovely philosophy of being inclusive and international, and I think that's an incredibly important thing. And I think just 2 months ago, I went to Ethiopia, and I taught at an art school in Ethiopia, which teaches the same methodology that we teach and that TIAC teaches, which was really amazing and really exciting, and amazing to know that people who had just such a completely different life and way of seeing are still, you know, drawing plaster casts and drawing boxes and thinking about values and shapes. It was really, really exciting and inspiring to see that. So I think it's a world dialogue, which is really lovely. It pulls down any boundaries.